Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about 28 things your grandmother did to save money and keep the household budget on track back in the day. Despite living in an age without technology, grandma had some mad strats for saving that we should all pay attention to. We're starting off with number 1, avoid credit cards. Something you never saw your grandparents do was rack up credit card debt. They probably didn't even have credit cards, to be honest. People in the old days just saved up, and if they couldn't afford it, they didn't buy it. It's probably strange to think about in such a credit-driven society, but they're not wrong. It's one of the best money-saving tips out there. Don't live beyond your means. Number 2, ration out meat. Grandma would stretch out the meat budget by using smaller portions in soups and stews. No one was having a whole steak at dinner time unless they were rich. It was more commonly used to flavor dishes and not so much be the star of the show. Meat is very expensive, so a lot of cultures still adopt this practice today. Having half the cow on a plate is very much a modern North American luxury. Number 3, eat at home. Something people did not do very often in the olden days was eat out at restaurants. Part of this was because international cuisine had not become so widely available yet. We're spoiled to be able to find 15 different styles of restaurant in one little town, but that wasn't the case in, say, 1950, so inevitably, people cooked at home more, which saved their finances in the long run. Number 4, limit hot water use. This is going to sound weird, but I know for a fact that in our ancestors' times, there were many instances of all the children reusing the same bath water. Water had to be boiled on the stove to manually pour a bath, and it was a lot of work, so they would just take turns, usually going by age. Kind of puts things in perspective when most people nowadays will take one long 15 or 20 minute shower with scalding hot water all to themselves, and that's the norm. No wonder our electricity bills are so high. Number 5, make a shopping list. I guarantee you wouldn't catch your grandparents going, "Wow, look at these new jalapeno mozzarella sticks, let's try those tonight in the air fryer," at the grocery store. No, they had a simple grocery list and they stuck to it. These types of exotic processed foods didn't exist, and depending on the era, nor did refrigerators, let alone freezers, so stocking up at big box stores was just not a thing. Frequent trips to the grocery store, usually on foot, meant food was kept practical and less expensive. Number 6, barter with neighbors. Trading goods and services was a no-brainer during tough economical times, and your grandparents capitalized on this. There wasn't a stigma associated with sharing like we have nowadays. Exchanging baking for a mechanic's work or childcare amongst families was commonplace. I think it led to a more connected society overall, and people could keep their money instead of having to pay someone per hour. Number 7, cut your own hair. Sure, some people probably went to the hairdresser or barber, but for the older generations, cutting your hair at home was such a cost saver that kept on giving. After all, hair doesn't stop growing. It's just unfortunate how many kids ended up with that classic bowl cut. Cringe. Number 8, use every bit of product. Cutting open tubes of toothpaste or hand lotion to get the last bit out is kind of unheard of nowadays, but I guarantee your grandmother was doing this with everything. Oftentimes you'll glean an extra tablespoon or more, and it all adds up. You'll see older generations doing this with cooking too, adding a bit of water to the jar of pasta sauce and shaking it to get a few more cents of product out. Number 9, make your own laundry detergent. Using simple ingredients like borax and washing soda, our grandparents would find DIY solutions to household cleaning products, and this is just one of them. There wasn't a laundry list, no pun intended, of toxic ingredients because it was just the bare minimum needed to get the job done. Nowadays, those conglomerate companies responsible for brands like Lysol and Mr. Clean, they pay a lot of money in advertising to keep us believing we need to spend a ton of our budget on various products to keep the house sanitized when it's simply not the case. Things like lemon juice and vinegar do the trick just fine. Number 10, pick wild fruits. In World War II times, people were urged to pick rose hips, the fruit of those pretty flowers we all know and love. They're high in vitamin C and can be used to make a simple tea, syrup, and more. Wild foraging isn't as prevalent nowadays, but it's a very useful skill that can save money and provide nourishment to your diet if done correctly. Number 11, save old buttons and fabric. Look, I'm not saying grandma was a hoarder, but in some cases it was hard for her to let go of seemingly benign items in case they could be reused for something. It's easy to scoff at this behavior in a society where you can just hit up Dollar Tree or Amazon and get what you need so conveniently, but all of this does come at a cost. Grandma knew that a spare button or piece of fabric could be used to mend something, and so it was always saved for a day that it could be utilized in a creative way to fix anything from shirts to socks. Number 12, collect change. We now live in a mostly cashless society, but back in the old days, people would pick up a nickel or a penny from the ground and actually use it for something, saving up little coins for future spending because it all adds up. Number 13, make your own gifts. Baking, crafting, and homemade wrapping paper were all extremely common in the olden days. It was very rare to receive something expensive and new, especially during the Depression or war times, when many items were rationed. It's a money-saving tip your grandparents used out of necessity, but it can still be used to this day by choice. Number 14, canning. Canning in general was huge back in the old days. Your grandma realized that growing a big garden and finding ways to preserve food more efficiently was key. It wasn't all Walmart runs and Amazon Prime 50 years ago. People just didn't rely on convenience, but rather thought long-term for produce consumption. In addition, you didn't see mangoes or watermelon in the winter in most stores. Our world has become so internationally connected, but in grandma's time, it was all about getting through the winter with locally grown staples like potatoes and carrots. Number 15, make your own broth. Something most people just buy nowadays, broth was typically made using leftover bones and vegetable scraps, especially in the Depression era. Careful consideration was taken to never waste a thing, because it was all precious. Number 16, turn old towels into washcloths. Nothing was chucked into the garbage unless it was actually garbage in our grandparents' time. Our idea of garbage is so different nowadays. Something like old towels would be cut up into washcloths, old shirts would be cut up into rags to be used in the garage. Everything had a use until it couldn't be stretched any further, and that's how they managed to get by financially during tough times. Number 17, skip soda and junk food. People did have some processed food back in the day, but mainly everyone was healthier because it was extremely limited. Processed foods may be cheap, but you do pay a long-term cost to your health, so be like your ancestors and try to eat as simply as possible. Your wallet will thank you, and your body will too. Number 18, plan meals. Your grandmother would likely start dinner by boiling a pot of water and making a simple soup or stew with some homemade bread. She would avoid food waste and save money by planning ahead and using up ingredients that were going to spoil first, and keep things like onions, potatoes, and carrots in the kitchen for their longevity and versatility for so many recipes. At the end of the day, planning and having these strategies saved a ton of money. Number 19, darn your socks. When something had a hole in it, people back then knew their way around a sewing kit. There wasn't a rush to go replace socks or shoes when they could just be sewn, glued, resoled, not resoled like sold, but you know, a new sole put on it, you know what I mean. And I guarantee you don't know the last time you heard about someone darning their socks or visiting a shoe cobbler. Are there even shoe cobblers anymore? Anyway, it's interesting to consider all of the ways in which we aren't saving by repairing things instead of replacing them. It's what your grandparents would do. Number 20, reuse wrapping paper. If wrapping paper was used for a gift, it was always saved to be used again. The whole concept of a giant living room filled with wrapping paper and gifts was unheard of at Christmas. Gifts were minimal and practical. Everyone stayed on budget because they didn't feel that pressure to keep gifting and gifting endlessly every year. Number 21, grow a garden. Back in the old days, your grandmother had a garden full of practical vegetables, potatoes, onions, carrots. Those were all big staples because they store well and they're easy to grow. If you had land, you weren't using it to keep an immaculate grass lawn. You were using it to grow food to feed your family on a strict budget. Number 22, reuse jars and containers. Tupperwares can be expensive, and many products that are now in plastic would be in glass years ago, so naturally, your grandparents would save the glass jars and use them to store anything from dried goods to spices. If you're short on storage containers, just remember, save your glass jars, and you can save money this way. Number 23, cook large batches. Cooking a big pot of soup or stew or several loaves of bread at once is something people did a lot more decades ago. Most times because they had a bigger family, but in general, it cost time and energy to cook, so batch cooking and eating leftovers was something families got into the habit of doing. Nowadays, with freezers being so common, making freezer meals for breakfast, work, or school lunches, and even dinner is a no-brainer and something you can definitely pick up from your grandparents' time. Number 24, make your own bread. Homemade bread is cheaper than store-bought and it's healthier because there's less additives. Back in the day, buying bread at the store was far less common because most of our ancestors knew how to bake it at home. Number 25, turn off lights. You would never catch people wasting electricity in the old days. In fact, many people still used kerosene lanterns in the evening because for them, it was more economical. Leaving lights on in a room you're not in? Forget about it. No one had that luxury like they do today. Again, we wonder why our bills are so high. Number 26, hang clothes to dry. Your grandparents used a clothesline instead of a dryer, which was a modern luxury most did not have. Laundry took more time, but it was a zen activity that didn't cost much money compared to how it does now. The sun cost nothing to dry your clothes, and your grandparents definitely took advantage of this. Number 27, reuse aluminum foil. Reusing any items like aluminum foil and grocery bags in the kitchen was common practice with your grandma. If something still had a use, you just didn't throw it out. Number 28, take care of your things. Polishing and repairing shoes, for example, instead of replacing them, was another unheard of thing that went on back in the day. Nowadays, with fast fashion dominating most marketplaces, it's impossible to find quality items worth investing in most of the time. Back then, though, clothing items were made from higher quality materials, and your grandmother would take care to fix them and maintain them instead of throwing them out to seek the latest fashion. It's just not something people did. Number 29, walk everywhere. Your grandmother was used to walking and carrying back a bag of groceries from the store. Unlike our modern era where everyone is urged to buy their own car, walking was the only option for most people back then. It all comes down to consumerism. They want us to buy more cars because car companies don't make money from us walking. Number 30, have potlucks. Something that was common in the old days was having a community or family potluck. Most events included these. It was a fantastic way to try new dishes and have everyone be fed without anyone breaking the bank. There's so many things that your grandmother did to save money, and it was good for the environment, and despite being time-consuming, the household ran on a more efficient budget. It was definitely a simpler time, and lately we have often traded convenience and speed at a cost to our wallets. If you want to find out more inspiration for saving money, be sure to check out the video I put on screen here. It's brutally honest, and I think you'll enjoy it. I'll see you over there.